developers to use it, it's an $80 million a year business. By the way, amazing. You know, I'd love to start that tomorrow, but typically venture dollars need to be behind things that can be $1 billion plus outcomes, even though, you know, as we know, they rarely are. So team, then size of market that they're going into, and then ultimately, I like to dig in on what's actually happening. Like what is the product? Who's using it? How would they say it's changed their business? And as quickly as possible, you know, it's this person's job to figure out if this is an area to spend more time or not. But those are kind of some of the three main buckets I think that most venture capitalists would hit on.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You got it.
How do you typically evaluate the size of the potential maximum size of a business? You know, like if you were looking at online retail 25 years ago, would you have ever imagined that it could be a however many $1 billion business?
No, is the short answer. And another example of what you're saying is Uber. So Crosscut, like a lot of other venture funds, it wasn't early Uber, but it was at a roughly $300 million valuation. We could have invested in Uber, but the truth is Uber started out as a black car service in in San Francisco, and it was going to compete with the taxi cabs. And the average venture capitalist, I guess in this case includes us, sort of looked at it and said, well, the taxi cab market in the Bay Area is $15 million a year. Even if you get 20% of that, that's $3 million. You do that in 20 cities. It just didn't seem like that big of a business. We all now know Uber dramatically changed user behavior and therefore, you know, massively expanded the TAM. But I think that's one thing venture capitalists get wrong often. But the core way that we try to figure out TAM is we just look at what's the total size of that actual market that you're addressing. And then we try to be realistic on how much of that market you can really get. And truthfully, if anybody gets 5 or 10% of any market, they're winning, right? That's a huge win for that product and for that business. So generally, if it's a $2 billion market, we sort of think the max that business can get to is $200 million. And we need to tell ourselves, or have the entrepreneurs tell us how they're going to be able to expand the market. It is one thing. All that being said, honestly, the funny thing about TAM, like it is amazing. So many businesses end up pivoting and changing direction that I think we almost spend too much time on the addressable TAM that they're going after, because inevitably 6 months later, that product's not really getting traction. They pivot slightly over to the left into, by the way, a huge TAM. So we spend all that time, you know, trying to figure out this smaller market when in reality, the startups 50% of the time pivot enough where they're going into another market. So I think most importantly as an entrepreneur, well, just to spend a second on it, most importantly, you got to do something that you really care about and that you think you have a passion for doing. I mean, as we all know, the startup business is a nasty business in a lot of ways. The venture business is a nasty business. There's easier ways to make money and easier ways to do great things in society. But if you're passionate about what you're building and the market is big enough to support you and a team and create revenue, then I think that's enough for starting the business. If it's going to get venture dollars, then I think you need to spend time making sure that the market, the addressable market, is $1 billion plus to get venture dollars, as a good rule of thumb.
Question for you, a little more technical. Go ahead.
Would it be a worldwide $1 billion market or within a specific area that you're targeting?
Good question. We mostly try to look at US TAM. I think when you start putting in international TAM, it's kind of fool's gold. If that happens, great, but US TAM is what I'd look at.
My question was, when you look at basically a startup and they're pitching to you, would you rather than look at a huge market and going, yeah, we're going to tackle that market. And then maybe say we're going to start with this something small. Oh, sorry, actually backward. Sorry, let me back up. So let's say there's two ways going about it. I have this product and it's a technology. The technology can apply across a bunch of different verticals, which means a huge market. Or I can just start with one tiny market and say, hey, I just want to dominate this small market with the potential to go upstream. Or would you rather see basically a company, hit for the fences and then try and dominate across the entire whole bunch of different verticals, and only, at the worst case scenario, only dominate one of the verticals? What's more enticing to you eventually as an investor?
The first example. The first example is
Which is go big.
No. The first example is go where you can win. I think startups oftentimes get confused and they're trying to boil the ocean and they're going to build 15 products and all these different buckets. I'd much rather have you pick one vertical where you say, this is a tool that we know we can build that these 15 companies say they'll want and they'll use. I'd much rather do that than sort of a Swiss Army knife that's trying to boil the ocean. The truth is the startup game is so hard anyway. If you're not laser focused, and I'm fine, by the way, being laser focused until there's a reason to switch, that's fine. But you got to be laser focused on one relatively finite goal or use case. And then once you win there, moving on.
Thank you.
Yep.
Brett, I had a question that I want to piggyback on what Raymond asked you.
You got it?
Yeah. So if we are talking about if a product has several verticals, as Raymond mentioned, and the technology could work, the same technology could work, or the product could work on two of the many verticals. Would you, and if suppose the startup wants to go for both those verticals, matter of just changing the face of the product, whether it's used for this vertical or that vertical, would that be still a no-no, or should we just go for one vertical?
I still, I get where you're going, and it is very enticing if you're saying all we got to do is just change the face and then whammo. The issue becomes, in most cases, that's not actually true. You change the face, but once you start going at that different customer set, they want different things in the product. They have different needs. Then it's just hard. The startup world is a naturally under-resourced world. So you're already swimming upstream. I mean, let's be honest, the startup is swimming upstream. Like there's 3 people and they're trying to sell into American Airlines. And it's just everything about it is swimming upstream. And I think anything, including going after 2 verticals at the same time, is just going to make it less likely for the overall startup to be successful. What I would be a fan of is run fast and hard at the first vertical, the one you think is most likely to be the winner. Figure out if it is, and if it is, keep on trucking. If it isn't, immediately go into that second vertical. I think that's going to be much more likely to be a successful outcome.
Okay, thank you.
Got it.
Can I ask you one more question?
Got it.
This is about founders. So how do you perceive first-time founders? Obviously, the ones who are, serial, or this is their second startup or has a win, would get more weight, right, at any VC or any investor. Mm-hmm. But what do the first-time startup founders need to do that would make you feel, aha, this might be a win?
One of the reasons we've stayed in seed at Crosscut instead of going and turning into a much bigger fund is I for one love first-time founders, and you can kind of see and spot the traits of a successful first-time founder before they've ever even started anything. As a matter of fact, the business that Spencer mentioned called Picasso, Austin is the CEO. Austin is really a first-time founder there, and he's phenomenal. So long story short, there's nothing wrong with a first-time founder. There's a lot of what we try to do, and what I wish I had when I was a first-time founder, is not make, you don't actually have to make every single mistake yourself. I made a lot of them. So when I'm working with first-time founders, I just say, this is the mistakes I made. factor this into your own business roadmap. So hopefully you don't have to make them as well. That's really the biggest difference that I see between first and second time founders, is just making a lot of relatively simple mistakes, for the first time. And so I think our job again is to try to alleviate that and skip those issues. But you're in the right city for first time founders. There's 32 active incubators and accelerators in Los Angeles today.
Oh, we are in the Bay Area.
You're in the Bay Area. Well, there's 50 in the Bay Area.
You're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So you had said that first-time founders have a bunch of traits that are successful, that successful first-time founders have. Like, what would some of those traits be?
Number one by far is tenacity and horsepower and stick-to-itiveness. Without a doubt, the number one trait is never say die. Whatever word you want to put in there, it's that. It's, I will keep on fighting until this thing is a success. And the truth is, in 2020, there are so many venture capital funds like Crosscut, and so many incubators and accelerators, and so many angels, and so many wealthy individuals, and so many family offices. If you as the founder are willing to keep on trying, there honestly is someone out there that will fund your business. I mean, I don't necessarily recommend it. I don't recommend spending 5 or 6 or 8 or 9 years sort of in that mode. But it's possible if a person wants to, but that is by far the number one trait across the board for successful founders. You can track it all the way up to, fancy names like Mark Zuckerberg to founders that come in and around Harvey Mudd. You'll see that trait.
One quick question to piggyback off of what your feedback to her was. What is one of the mistakes that founders, first time or otherwise, make that you really wish would stop?
It's a tough one, but there is a unique balance between confidence and arrogance that you see in some first-time founders that really ends up hurting them, because when it falls into the bucket of arrogance, and a lot of times, honestly, I'm not. This is no big secret, but I'm not like a hardcore tech person necessarily. Even the way Josh is, like, I'm not a programmer. I'm not like programming code. Consequently, we have a lot of tech CEOs that know much more about their actual product and business than I do. I just know the traits that have been successful across lots of different businesses. The point being, when they get out over their skis and they're not willing to listen to feedback about why it's dangerous to outsource all your tech, the risks of hiring a head of sales too early or something else, and they override that feedback, it typically is not good for that business or that entrepreneur. So that's one single trait to be cautious of. And I realize it's a balance because, again, the odds are stacked against you as a first-time founder or any founder. The odds are stacked against you. So you do have to have a certain just confidence to be doing it, but that line is there, and people should be cognizant of it.
Excellent. Thank you.
You got it. Great questions.
Hi, Brett. I had a question kind of off topic, but something you mentioned about the big draw of LA being the kind of pool and history of the entertainment's roots there. And one thing I was curious about, if you're seeing kind of that collaborative spirit initiate some and like collaborative relationships with some of the like old Hollywood agencies such as SAG or these other regionally local work entities, which would also benefit from having startups in tech that might be a bit cautious about losing their jobs or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. It's, well, I should have mentioned it earlier. I think the one other reason why the entrepreneurial community or the tech community has blossomed so much in Southern California is because LA has such entrepreneurial roots. Even if you think about a writer, an actor, a director, coming to Los Angeles, that's a very entrepreneurial thing. That's a thing of saying, hey, I want to be an actor. I want to be a writer. I can go there. You know, it's not going and working at IBM. It's not going and working at Ford. And that's been a 125-year thing in LA. As you then weave into your question more around the established Hollywood entities, I guess, like SAG and other things, and how they can morph, I guess, or benefit from the tech thing. We're already seeing it. There's a startup out of Upfront that, you know, there's a lot of these old fashioned things like the way royalties are paid that has been the same way. It's insane, by the way, I might add, and very inefficient. And I can't remember the name of it, but the startup out of Upfront is tackling that. And specifically in that case, they got SAG and some of the other traditional institutions to support them early on to say, we want this system to work better. So I think for the most part, when possible, and you see it in content formats, they've been, and you see even the talent embracing a lot of the new formats. I think that part has been relatively smooth over the last few years. Admittedly, it got off to a slow start back in the 2000s, but it's sped up here recently, especially with COVID.
So there's a lot of talk about software companies, software startups, software integration, and I think that's just sort of the nature of our day and age. But I am working on a hardware renewable energy company. I'm a sophomore at Pomona. I'm working with some friends from the 5Cs and from other places. What is the role of venture capital in the modern hardware startup? And I'm happy to clarify on that if
Sure.
that'd be helpful.
Well, the main role is, of course, to fund it.
Yeah.
I think the good news to me, and this from when I was at UCLA and from when you're at Pomona, frankly, you just have a big advantage compared to what I had, right? There was no amazing Josh Jones running accelerator incubator that I ever knew about or had access to. Exactly, send them a heart. There were no Techstars LA. There was no Angel Networks. There was no Crosscuts, right? Which is fine, but it was very hard. I mean, we literally, essentially, believe it or not, just cold called rich people out of the phone book to raise our first $220,000 to get an e-commerce site off the ground. My point being, today in the United States, there are 50 venture funds whose sole purpose, maybe 30 to 50 venture funds, sole purpose it is to invest in hardware startups. That's it. That's all they're doing. There's a couple in Pasadena, by the way. All their makeup, their DNA, their love in life is all about hardware startups. So that's the good news, right? It doesn't make your project any easier, and it doesn't make building hardware as difficult as you know. But access to that capital, number one, access to successful founders and operators that have built hardware startups in the past is readily available. And so, one, I would take full advantage of that. And I think that's sort of the place to start. Again, it's a huge advantage in 2020 to starting a hardware startup, or of course any other vertical that you're in.
So is there as much interest? But what do the hardware companies have as much potential for scale as software? Because they have to produce something. They have to produce hardware rather than just making more copies of their software license or whatever.
Yes. So yeah, the reticence on behalf of venture capital to be a little bit wary of hardware startups is literally just that. It's that it takes a lot of capital, right? Because you got to make something, and you want to sell more of it. Well, you got to make more of it, right? And that's just a fact. You can't get around that. Venture capital firms are very simple animals. They sort of go to where you can get the most bang for your buck. And the concern around hardware, yes, has always been they just soak up a lot of capital. So especially as an early stage fund, when you think about later rounds of capital, dilution And then also just frankly risks of not being able to access those later rounds of capital. There's just much more risk that the business eventually doesn't work. Other than that, again, like venture firms almost don't, to some degree, they're like water. They will just go wherever the opportunity is. But that's the red flag that you'll just have to get people around, right? And you get around it by showing, hey, at scale, I can produce this thing for $1,000 and I can sell it for $10,000. Okay, that's great. But it does just require more capital out of the gate. Consequently, there are firms that are set up specifically for hardware.
Thank you.
You got it.
My name is Peter Benjamin, Harvey Mudd, class of 80. You mentioned there are LA VCs doing hardware firms. I'm got a fusion motor prototype that I'd like to see funded. Do you have any names of these VCs I should contact?
Yeah, it's. I was thinking more nationally. So there are somewhere between 30 and 50 hardware-focused venture firms across the country. Root VC, ROOT VC in the Bay Area is one of the best. Avi, he actually lives in LA. He is very hardware centric. 8 VC in the Bay Area also does a lot of hardware. And other than that,
Root invested in Benson's company, so we can, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's quite a few of them. There is not a big name fund that I know of in Los Angeles that is specializes in hardware, but they certainly are all over the country. And the great thing today in venture, even Crosscut, we used to be, as I think I mentioned, almost all exclusively Southern California. We are now 65 to 70% LA. So funds are making investments all over the place, and those hardware firms are as well.
Thank you.
You got it.
Brett, I wanted to hear a little more about your earlier days going through phone books, and how did you get started when you were a first-time founder? What's your story?
You know, the truth is it was long and painful, and I don't want to bore everyone with it, but it took us it took us 12 to 14 months to raise $220,000 to launch our first website. The website was called CD Universe, and we were selling movies and music and games online. And I know that doesn't sound very revolutionary today, but in 1997, we were competing with Amazon, we were competing with CD Now, and we were the reseller with a heart. So it was very hard to get that business up and going. Once we got it going, because of the sort of dot-com gold rush, as it was called, we were able to then transition from purely individuals to raise the first 220 to an investment bank in New York City called Gerard Clower Madison. The main guy was named Manny Gerard. He put in $250,000 and then said, my fund will do another 250. And I know these seem like relatively small dollars. It felt like $100 million when we got it. That gave us enough to really buy the inventory to turn it into a working business. And then, believe it or not, we actually went public in April of 1999 is how we then got enough capital to kind of keep on trucking. But the sophistication around the diversity around investors and the number of investors and funds and everything, and incubators and accelerators in LA, huge advantage to starting a company. Not to mention, it's worth pointing out Spencer's point on just how much less people companies require and how much technology there already is that you can leverage.
Yeah, people, and just the cost of like making a website. Like you don't have to buy Solaris Spark $50,000 servers to put in your yeah.
All that being said, as we all know on this call, it's still not easy, and it's not supposed to be easy, but it is not easy. So
I wonder, actually, it's almost like if it gets too easy, I mean, easy, it's just, I bet there's 100 times more people trying startups. So it's like, yeah, you get a benefit, but so does everybody else. And it's not that it's a zero-sum game, but it makes it tougher to maybe stick out. And then what happened after the IPO, and how did it?
After the IPO, we figured out fairly quickly that we were going to, which is a good tie-in back to my original point around pivoting. we figured out we weren't the smartest guys. I started with my college roommate at UCLA, Brad, but it took us about 3 years to realize we were never going to beat Amazon. We were never going to beat CD Now in selling someone else's products and selling other commodity goods online. So after the sort of simultaneous with the dot-com crash in 2000, we sold the e-commerce division for $1 million. That $1 million gave us enough capital we had already been trying low-cost content sites. So we were really one of the first internet companies to launch casual game sites, similar to what you'd see on Zynga today. We started launching those in 2000. So we did lots of casual game sites. We did sports and other content sites. We did greeting sites. There was these short animation sites. We were launching 20 to 25 different internet sites a year, all low cost, all that we would monetize with performance advertising, all the way up until really 2003. And then the sort of concept was there's low cost content is fantastic, but what if we could launch a platform that had no cost content, essentially where the people were the ones posting all the content. And so that was one of the concepts behind launching MySpace. And MySpace it just grew faster than any of our other content sites and had different user behavior right out of the gate. And so we then saw that, put our best resources on that. And as I said on the intro, got very fortunate a couple years later, and both Viacom and News Corp realized they wanted to own it, and we sold to News Corp.
That's good to have the two people wanting to buy it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, two arch rivals, by the way, I might add, Sumner Redstone and Rupert Murdoch. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
It basically feels like 50 years ago that happened.
Yeah, I know. I remember we were in the same data center as you guys I remember like MySpace took all the power or whatever. It was like, we can't get any more power at Trevo.
Jake and I tell you, we were throwing servers at that thing. That's another thing about scalability. I mean, we effectively almost went bankrupt because the site was working so well, and we couldn't afford to keep buying those servers.
Yeah, I mean, was Friendster before you guys launched?
Yeah, Friendster was before.
Such bad performance.
Yes, and one of the reasons the Friendster was clunky and not cool. Jonathan Abrams was the founder, still a good friend. He's a great guy. Still kind of mad at me in some ways, but yeah, Friendster certainly existed, but was both uncool and you didn't have a lot of control over your site. So we attempted to beat them with cool and control, which we did, and then we all know what happened. We were eventually beat by uncool.
Uncool Facebook.
In Facebook, yes, exactly.
But their whole thing was just, until, in the beginning, it was just like free unlimited photo storage. Really, I felt like that was their secret. I was like, what are they're gonna lose so much money? It's gonna cost so much. I was thinking from a server side, but it was like, well, it is getting cheaper, I guess. And they made the money.
Well, really, we actually tried to buy Facebook twice. At one time, they countered at $75 million. By the way,
You said, "No way."
Yeah. Exactly. This could never be worth more than $75 million. But they're really, their .edu email address strategy was really good, right? It gave exclusivity feel. Yeah, and so that's what we saw. That's the first time we tried to buy them. Was they were really only on 4 or 5 campuses.
Yeah.
But
do you think if you'd bought it, like, how would that structure have worked? Would it have?
I think we would have ruined them.
You think it would have ruined it? Yeah.
I think it kind of worked out the way it was supposed to. I never would have guessed Facebook would be the size it is today, of course. But they were phenomenal. Even back then, like Zuckerberg was phenomenal. He's a product genius and very forward thinking.
Yeah, it was basically, it's funny because I was always like, we had web hosting, which was basically, it was like, yeah, you make your own website and you post your own pictures and like everyone will make their own websites. And really Facebook was just like, hey, what if everything you could do on the internet, you could do like kind of easily.
Yes, exactly. As it turns out, the best ideas are often not rocket science. That they are literally making everything just work and function a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Really, one of the reasons we beat Friendster so quickly was because we made Tom Anderson everybody's default friend, and that allowed you to search and connect with everyone else on MySpace. literally just that one change at like week 3 completely changed the trajectory of the business. Just that one little change of having everyone have one similar friend, one common denominator. You know?
That happens so much in business too, that you're like, it is really like one little thing that there's no real correlation between how hard it is to do something and fix something and how much it's worth.
Right.
There's
Exactly.
no correlation.
Yes. Well, and to that point, our product roadmap at MySpace, a lot of the feedback would come from the users. We'd rank it all on a whiteboard. One of the most important things was, how hard is it to do? If it's easy to do and we can do it like today, let's do it, you know?
Yeah. And then one of those is going to be like 100x growth because it was just blocking people stupidly. And it was like one line of code or something, and you didn't realize for months.
Right.
I remember DreamHost, I needed to add an index to a table in our database. It was like every single page load was taking like 12 seconds. And it was just, I was like, I don't know, servers are just slow. Everything, it just was like, kind of had gotten slower and slower as we added more users, and it just was so terrible. It was like Friendster or like worse. And I finally, like, somebody was just like, this cannot be, like, you don't have that many users. Like, there must be something wrong. And I was like, I don't know. And I finally was like, oh, I see. I didn't know about indexes on database tables. And I was like, okay. And you had this one line, and it was just like, everything was a half a second, milliseconds.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow. We were like throwing more servers at it and everything. And it was just like stupid. That kind of thing happens.
Yep.
Those were the days. So, I don't know how long we can keep chatting. I love chatting with people like you, Brett. I don't know if anyone else has other things.
We're at our deadline, yeah.
It is great to see you, and thank you for coming.
Always thrilled to be part of it, and look forward to seeing you in person.
Yep.
As soon as we're beyond the mess, and really looking forward to seeing the tram being in the air.
Yeah, we're actually going to submit the first phase thing right after the election. We're just going to make sure we do it right after the election, so no politics possibly. We've already been pre-approved by Metro for phase 1, basically. So it's possible. Cool. It's actually possible. It's crazy. Like, the mayor is excited. The local council members, senators, state senators, the head of the county.
And where roughly would it start and end?
Now we're talking UCLA to Santa Monica, downtown Santa Monica.
Amazing.
Yeah. Would be
huge.
General.
There was a quick question on there on my email address, which is I'm thrilled to always share, is just brett@crosscut.vc. Please email me. I'm happy always to help people on their business, or even in lots of cases think of a natural investor pool that to point you at. I want to be a resource.
That's the LA thing. All right.
It's the LA thing. All right, everybody, stay safe. Thank you.
Brett.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you for your time.
You got it.
.vc.
Josh,
Yep.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
You said this coming Friday, we have a 1-minute pitch that's going to go up on the website.
Yeah.
I can do that, not a problem. What about the 3-minute pitch? What's that about? What's going to happen?
I think you made up a 3-minute pitch.
Okay.
That might have been something we talked about before.